Control is back, this time no longer a third-person shooter. Instead, Control Resonant is a third-person action game with a melee focus. I asked the people behind the game why. At Annapurna Interactive in Hollywood, California, I got to play a few hours of the game on PlayStation 5 Pro and speak to the creative minds behind it, the game's director, Mikael Kasurinen, and the game's star, Sean Durrie. We talked about inspirations behind this adventure, why the change to a third-person melee game, and what makes a Control game so special. Mikael, I wanted to ask first, when you're creating a second game in a franchise, a third including Firebreak, it's a big departure this time. Was that more freeing, or did it add pressure for you as a creative?
I think this was the place we wanted to end up in the first place. So this was always the plan that once we started to create Control, it was supposed to be an RPG franchise. What was the kind of key question to me was that how do we do it in a way that it feels like clearly Remedy? So it has that kind of a Remedy vibe, and it's unique from that perspective. So when we started to work on the first game, we wanted to kind of take what is something that is we're like known for, like take that kind of action adventure recipe, but then we start to layer on top of that these different RPG elements, like you can kind of customize your character to a degree. You have things like side quests. You can actually make choices in conversations with other characters, things that we haven't really done before. So it was like a step towards that direction already. And we learned a lot, made a bunch of mistakes, but then tried to kind of see what's the right way to kind of move ahead. And as we were kind of building that kind of a continuity, that's how Control Resonant became like a full-fledged action RPG.
And just on that, the reaction when the game was announced that it wouldn't be a third-person shooter, it would be an action game, you obviously in some way must have expected that, but how did you react to the community's reaction, and was there a sense of just wait and see because we know what we have here?
Mix of both, I would say. Personally, very excited about the game. I feel like we have something really great and unique, and it was a lot about just waiting to let people see what the game actually is about. And I think we're fortunate because the community that we have, I think they're very trusting. They're with us, and they kind of believe in what we're doing, and they like the kind of unexpected twist and so on. And I hope the rest of the world as well. And it's been thrilling, and I think the response has been really amazing.
And Sean, I want to ask, when you got the call to come back, what were those conversations like? And Mikael, if you want to jump in here as well, what was that building that character, that obviously a huge part of the first game, but not the protagonist, and now flipping it into this thing where it is Dylan's game this time?
It was kind of a soft conversation at first because when they were explaining the first Control to me, we got to the end and they're like, and then the end happens and they're like, and he's not dead. He's not dead. But they didn't go farther than that at the time. And then shortly after that, they called me up and kind of pulled me aside and they're like, here's our idea. Are you down for this? Would you be interested? And I was like, absolutely, I would be interested in that. I think that's a great idea. And then as far as developing it, I got the immense privilege to go out to Finland and work with Mikael and the writers developing the character from the ground up. They didn't just hand the script over and say, learn this. They're like, you're playing it. He's completely different from the last game. What are some of your ideas that we can bring to this as well? So the amount of collaboration that happened was incredible from my perspective. It's just something that typically isn't afforded to you as an actor, quite frankly. But I was in the unique situation of having played the character, and then also Remedy trusting me to do what I can do and bring what I can bring to the project.
Excellent. A lot of time spent in the soundstage in Espoo then.
Yes.
Was this a mid-pandemic game, the start of development, or were you able to film and record a lot of it in person rather than kind of the tail end of the social distance and stuff?
It would have been after that. I learned about my involvement around mid-pandemic. And then the real meat and potatoes of it was after that. So I was able to go to the studio in Espoo, and then we were able to do recording sessions in studios here in Los Angeles, and then I'd have my directors and the producers in my ears on the headsets, and then a Zoom call, and then record it that way for some of the dialogue.
Nice. I wanted to, so the listeners of this will not know this, but behind the curtain, I sat in on an interview yesterday and heard you talk about some things. You mentioned Attack on Titan as as an inspiration, and then when I played through the demo today, I was like, I absolutely see that, the kind of going between the characters, especially with like the soft lock when an enemy is flying and you can attack that. What are some other inspirations, and more specifically, when you decide it's an action game, there's a lot of different paths you can go down. When did you basically single in on this style of character action game rather than like a Souls-like or something like that?
Right. So I feel like we have a combination of elements that is really unique. Instead of like doing the thing that many are doing where the fighting feels like it's focused on a single enemy at the time, we wanted to look at any of these kind of action setups as almost like a puzzle with multiple different moving parts. The environment itself, the different types of enemies that you're facing, and those enemies can be wildly different in scale and what they can do and so on. So you're like in this sandbox almost. And then the feeling is that it's kind of on you to figure out how you navigate that. And there's no perfect solution, and that's entirely the point. And then it kind of becomes about how you move, and traversal was important to us, like from the get-go, like that it's easy, snappy, and can do crazy wild things. You can fly, you can double jump, you can attach yourself to different surfaces and so on. And then just the different weapons that you have, the shape-shifting, aberrant, like all the different things it can do, and then all the supernatural abilities on top of that. So you have this kind of a really versatile, complicated tool set. And not just a tool set, but tons of different types of tools. And then you have to pick and create like your own tool set based on that. And I think it creates a really interesting mix of different types of elements. Like for instance, when you look at this kind of a fast-paced combat of Doom 2016, and it's a shooter, yes, but it's almost like when you enter an encounter, it's all about how you kind of move through it, how you utilize the space, what are the different attacks you're using at any given time, which enemy you choose to focus on, and so on. It's a very fast-moving thing, but of course it's also very kind of a direct in the sense how it handles like the different abilities that you have. We have a much like wider set of things, and yes, we're kind of playing around with gravity as well. So I think we have something unique, and it's all about like taking these different elements and bringing them together. One thing I would like to say is that I don't think it's as big of a departure from the first game as you might think. How you fought against the Hiss in the first game as Jesse was also all about movement. You usually didn't do well if you kind of stay put and hide behind the corners and so on. Usually you would fail. So it was also all about being aggressive, using your supernatural abilities, using your gun and so on, and the movement and all of those things together to be able to win. And that's what we're doing here as well.
When you were layering up those different gameplay elements, was there ever a moment where you thought, this is maybe a bit too far in some places? I was very impressed how well the camera coped with moving between surfaces and a lot of different enemies and some quite contained spaces. So for you, was that just a lot of tweaking, a lot of layering and taking away?
There's like tons of iteration that has happened in the game. For instance, when we did the shift for the first time, like with the gravity shift and your camera turns, and it comes to the kind of pacing and timing of like almost like in milliseconds. Like if we turn the camera too late, it can kind of trigger like a motion sickness type of a thing and so on. And we kind of learned that the camera should do as little as possible, and just even to kind of find a way to do that in the right, like that it doesn't do the wrong things. That was like a lot of work. and all the different ways you can fight, all the different details, how to make it really kind of a click and feel balance. Like there's tons of time that's been spent on that. And also one challenge has been that it's such a fast-paced game. Like every blow that you deal happens like within frames and so on. So, but also at the same time, we wanted to tell a story of a shape-shifting weapon and so on. And there's like literally just a few frames that kind of goes by where you kind of see how the weapon is born and so on. But to make sure that the VFX and the animations, all of those are kind of done in the right way. Again, tons of iteration and so on until we got it to look exactly right.
Sean, I wanted to ask, when you are creating the performance for the first game, obviously a very different task from creating this performance. What's something you learned about the character or your portrayal of the character that evolved over the time of spending much more as the focus in Control Resonant?
Something that was kind of unique within this sequel is that the performance of Dylan in the first game was this infected version, and now we've moved to here and that's gone. So it was, in a sense, there's almost a rediscovery, and that's kind of the essence of the story, of him discovering not only himself and his humanity and his strength, but the biggest things we carried from the first to the second was the love for his sister, his yearn for family, his yearning to have a purpose, and it's a very human story when you get to the center of it, because I think all of us want to have a purpose in life, and we want to get up every day and have something that we know we can go do, be a part of, or help. And that's exactly what Dylan is trying to find now, and that's exactly what he was missing in the first game.
Yeah, I would add to that telling a human story was like a very natural place to go to. It's all about Dylan who's been denied a sense of humanity through his whole life. And the game was about entering from that kind of a closed-off paranatural space, the oldest house, into the real world and so on. And a huge part of his journey is about connecting with others, learning to trust others, and of course for others to learn to trust him based on all the things that have happened.
I noticed that obviously in the first game, a lot of the time it is Jessie coming upon something that's just happened, reacting to something that she's just missed, or there's something that is in the past that is impacting her. A lot more live conversation than this game, a lot more kind of character interactions. For you, when you're playing off another actor, is that a different performance from when you're in, okay, I am the player character mode now, I have to be like, oh, that enemy's a big guy, I should do this to that, rather than in the kind of conversational space?
Like kind of a yes and no. I think ultimately, like the thought processes are very similar. Like you have to come to a logical and truthful reason to be saying what you're saying. But it was just, it was very nice in this particular game. Often Zoe, the actress Frankie playing Zoe, and I were in the same booth. So we were having a conversation with each other. Whereas in the first Control, Dylan is speaking into the ether very often, and you almost need a translator to figure out what he is mumbling on about. And this one, it's, again, very human in the midst of lots of chaos that isn't human at all. Lots of paranatural things, lots of enemies that are almost unexplainable. But at the core of it, he's having actual relationships with people.
One interesting thing that a lot of people have not realized, but it's kind of obvious, is that in the previous game, Jessie, basically, like, we hear her thoughts. But with Dylan, there is no internal voice. And the thinking was right from the get-go that it's all about how Dylan connects with other people. So that's why it was so important to have somebody like Zoe there, like, his handler, who is, in a way, who Dylan talks to and is almost like an internal kind of a voice for him, in a way, like of something to bounce off from and so on, to process things and understand them. So yeah, it's all about connecting with others, and that's kind of goes into the way we tell the story in a fundamental way.
I had to ask, there has been a Remedy arms race in the past couple of games of these kind of like bombastic moments. Like I feel like it started with the Ashtray Maze and then just moving on through the games. Is there pressure for you to have like your moment in this game? Obviously you're not going to be specific and I wouldn't want you to spoil it, but does that feel like not a crutch, but do you feel that you have to deliver something like that, or do you feel enough freedom to be like, I'm making the game I want to make, those moments will come, this isn't something that I'm premeditating, it will just happen when it happens?
Definitely the latter. It's crucial that we build the right story, we build the right world, and if there was a philosophy, it was more like, instead of like banking and creating like one huge tentpole moment on the second half of the game. How about we kind of create a more even journey where it feels like there's this kind of an interesting, thought-provoking, mind-bending moments through the whole arc, and integrate these kind of elements that make them unexpected and engaging and interesting, and of course weird as well to make it more fun. So, and as you said, like just establishing the structure and so on, and then yes, what then happens is that those kind of moments kind of start to grow of them like cells to become big and interesting, and you don't need to decide it beforehand. And I do believe that if you think like that, I think it's not necessarily a good thing for the overall experience.
Because it would become like a gimmick at that point. It would become, okay, here's the one gimmick level that everyone talks about, and then they would miss out on the rest of the game would suffer from a developmental perspective. I have to ask about the use of mixed media, because you absolutely love mixed media in terms of overlaying real footage, real images, and music. Is that something that a Control game has to have, in your opinion? Is that from an aesthetic point of view? Because you've proven that a Control game, gameplay-wise, can be kind of anything at this point, but aesthetically, is that key to you?
I think the way we think is that it's just one tool in the toolbox that we should use if we feel like it's the right thing to do. And we've always felt kind of unshackled from any kind of a preconceptions of what's allowed and, or what you can't do. And we always thought like, well, why not? Like, why can't we take this element and let's say the visions of Jesse and using like live action elements on top of the game screen and so on, as long as it conveys the emotion and story that we want to tell. So I guess I don't think there's a preconceived thinking that we have to use that. But it tends to be a place we often go to because it works just really well.
Excellent. And just finally, I'll come to you in a second, Mikael. Sean, the game comes out in September. For listeners and readers that want to kind of immerse themselves in something that maybe inspired your performance or something you were thinking about, what's a piece of media that you would send them away to look at?
That's a really good question, in that I didn't necessarily use other pieces of media for my inspiration for the character. I went to very, quite frankly, serious human things. I did a lot of research into actual trauma and trauma response and victims of trauma and how they deal with it and what happened to them as they get older and how it manifests, because that, quite frankly, Dylan had a really messed up childhood, and how did he deal with that? And so that's what I was bringing to it, because I wanted to portray not a caricature of it. I really wanted to have, even though it's within a paranatural world, I wanted to have it be believable because he is a human at heart. But I would say anything, if you go down like the Lost Highway, that sort of media, any of the kind of sci-fi or film that doesn't do too much over-explaining. Yeah, Fincher is a good source.
I don't know why it happened like this. It was a bit of a surprise to me as well. As I was kind of thinking about, cultural resonance as a concept and so on, but this influence from kind of a Asian art and entertainment affected me quite a lot. When me and the art director Elmeri, we were thinking about the character overall. We were thinking about this kind of a continuous sense of motion, like in Kurosawa films and so on. Like every single shot feels like there's something kind of going on, and there's this kind of a dynamic feel to it. So it's not an accident when you kind of see Dylan. He's always seems like he's in motion. When you step into the world, there's always something kind of happening, leaves blowing in the wind and so on. Like it feels like this active world that is exists outside of your kind of presence. And then mentioned Attack on Titan being an influence, and then an older anime called Neon Genesis Evangelion, which I was blown away by in the 90s and still am. I think it's one of the most amazing things ever created. Totally going against convention in regards of, character setups and so on, like a young boy, 14 years old, set up in an impossible situation, all the responsibility and expectations from others, and him also utterly failing at many different things, and others trying to support him. And of course, the esoteric kind of a interesting mix of religion and sci-fi and a Tokyo that is like the third iteration, because it's been devastated already so many different times, facing an apocalyptic kind of a threat and so on, and how they fight against that. So that was a huge inspiration as well. And when you play the game, I'm sure you will see the influence in a very direct way.